Beneath the relentless sun, the unforgiving embrace of iron shackles awaits. Welcome to the underbelly of a Roman war galley, where comfort is a distant memory and survival hangs in precarious balance. Here, you are not a warrior, but a mere extension of the oar, chained and stripped of dignity. The drumbeat echoes through the cramped space, demanding obedience with each relentless thud, while the air, thick with putrid stench and desperate cries, bears witness to your struggle. Hunger gnaws at your insides as your hands blister and pain becomes a constant companion. Welcome aboard this harrowing voyage. You may not survive it. Let's embark on an evocative journey deep into the forbidding world below the deck of an ancient Roman war galley, where life was an unending test of endurance and despair. In this shadowy realm, dimly lit by flickers of light filtering from above, the air remained thick, cloying, filled with the constant rhythm of the drum that dictated every breath and motion. Beneath these echoes, you cease to be a free person. You're now sinew and sweat, chained to a bench, a mere extension of the oar you must relentlessly pull. Here you become part of a rhythm greater than any single life, where the ocean's whispers mingle with the relentless drum beats, marking your transition from manhood to a service driven by survival over self. The wooden bench beneath you transforms from a seat to a testament of ironclad desolation. You're no longer defined by your past. Your new identity is woven around your bench, oar, and the watchful eyes of an adept overseer. The journey to this underworld often begins with grim choices, though often choice is an illusion. For some, debt wound tightly around their lives, nudging them towards this life of chains. Seduced by promises of pay and an escape from creditors, the reality of muscle toil soon dissolved such delusions, leaving only blistered hands and vacant eyes. For others, no choices existed. Condemned criminals or prisoners of war found themselves unceremoniously thrust into this darkness. Velites, Roman warriors who erred against discipline, sometimes ended here, irony shaping their downfall from soldier to sinew-bound slave. Iron clinks in a constant symphony, a reminder of your shackled reality. Every man descending into this hold finds himself owned by the iron that lashes him to service. Roman emperors spoke lofty words of civilization and grandeur, yet in these lower depths, survival reigns supreme, marked by the persistent bonds that deny you autonomy, making you a part of the ship. The drumbeat becomes an inescapable master, dominating every thought. It strips away individual will and transforms it into collective action. Each beat hurdles through shared labour, threatening those unable to maintain its exacting rhythm with unsparing punishment. To some, it offers a rare reliability in an onslaught of chaos. To others, it's a relentless throb of lost freedom and unending toil. You clasp an oar, and in doing so you embrace the relentless labour it demands. This rough-hewn piece leaves your hands raw, but turn after turn, your skin becomes as calloused as your spirit. Dreams might briefly drift to distant shores, but those visions are as intangible as the distant stars. The rowing demands submission, not just of muscle, but of mind, synchronized with the unforgiving sea and the drum's incessant command. Yet unexpectedly amidst this unhospitable life, you find solace. Camaraderie blooms in shared struggle, a fragile brotherhood against the drumming despair. Here your oar is not just a tool of subjugation, but a bond tying you to others. This shared adversity forges companionship in the shifting tides of hardship, where together you bind your spirits against the merciless sea, finding unity beneath the sun's relentless gaze. Yet hidden from sight and from history's gilded narratives, the rowers are nameless shadows, mere cogs in the vast machination of Roman power. Their aches and dreams drown in history's noise, are consigned to oblivion beneath the Roman virtues, lionized in stone and script. The tide of fear clings to you, adding lines invisible yet deeply etched. The spectre of unseen forces weighs heavily, from exhaustion's threat to the lurking, relentless sea. Each stroke risks failure. With the tempest of dread a constant, unyielding companion, gnawing at your tenuous grip on endurance. It manifests silently, binding you with more than chains, as each breath echoes its presence. Amidst the maritime purgatory, the vision of home wraps itself around your heart, a beacon of warmth against the oppressive ship life. This yearning for land kindles amid laborious shadows, whispering of green fields and familiar hearths. Yet, it is a vision only fleetingly vivid, like morning mist dissolving in the sun's first light. Such dreams remain disconnected from the tangible, beautiful but divorced from your current reality. Hope is strained, almost breaking under the repetition of salty air and churning water. Yet, in resilience, a modest flame endures, a whisper of sanity illuminated by shared tribulations of those who pull beside you. Faces yield only resolve amidst adversity, the shadows of wear marred by scars but brightened by endurance. It is a fragile spark, tended meticulously in the presence of kindred spirits. Their shared battles against this relentless existence bind you together against the capricious tides, each bearing prayers to the constellations, silent songs of freedom, and elusive sanctuary. As the grip weakens on this past, an inescapable truth rises. The shadows of these chains now drift across time, an indelible testament echoing through history's current. Traces of those who toiled upon the waves become part of an extensive narrative, shadows etched onto the memory of nations. Beneath the dirt of ages lies their reality, imprinted on humanity's collective journey, as marks of resilience against adversity, breathing life into the enduring tides of history. Imagine stepping onto a Roman war galley, a vessel poised for conquest but an olfactory nightmare within. The first sensation isn't sight or sound, but smell, a pungent blend of sweat, human waste, and dank salted wood. This relentless barrage on your senses clings to you, sinking deep into the fibres of your clothes, your hair, your skin, as if the very timbers of the ship are exhaling a breath of untold misery. The closer you get to the crowded belly of the ship, the more you realise that this scent isn't simply an inconvenience. It's the undeniable testament of survival in unthinkable conditions. Life is a cramped existence below decks, with little chance to thwart the accumulation of grime and sweat, as cleansing water is sacredly reserved for quenching thirst. Daily, this reality unfolds without respite. Privacy is a forgotten luxury, and necessity dictates that relief comes via a shared bucket, its anonymity a characteristic of the human throng below. In this claustrophobic environment, the bucket is a reluctant participant in the sordid ballet, its contents sloshing ominously with the ship's every sway. Responsibility for its disposal is as elusive as personal space, leaving residues of waste pooling and mingling with the other intolerable odours, potent precursors for disease. Cramped conditions and scant hygiene foster illness without discrimination. Diarrhea and dysentery trailing closely behind the physical exhaustion of rowing. There's no physician here. Survival's often a lottery of strength, bizarrely matched against luck. With cramped quarters and scarce ventilation, the air is a thick tapestry of discomfort, woven tightly by the heat generated from dozens of labouring bodies. Sweat fills every seam, each droplet a testament to the back-breaking labour demanded by the relentless taskmaster's rhythm. The drum that dictates the tempo of their labour translates perspiration to currency, extracting it from weary rowers who taste its saline legacy as it trickles into parched mouths. In this relentless cycle, clothing, if any remains, becomes a burden, drenched and sticking shabbily to skin, then cooling to chill their bones during the brief reprieve of night. Alongside this constant toil and sweat, the very walls and beams surrounding them whisper betrayal through their slow march of decay. Each creak of the vessel hints audibly at the omnipresent rot spreading slowly through the wooden frame, a sound both lulling and menacing. Mould sprawls unchecked where the sea kisses timber, infusing a new layer of odour as nature claims its due. The rotting hull is a parallel to human suffering, unseen but steadily undermining the stability of all it encompasses. Supplies fare little better, succumbing to damp, pestilence adding its bitter fragrance to the foul air as vermin gnaw through stores and sometimes worse. Beneath this murky ecosystem, life's true battles play out between these uninvited parasites. Rats make their shambling parade through the shadows, leaving evidence of their trespass in every corner, while lice and fleas find an ideal breeding ground on flesh, rarely disturbed by soap or water. Each bite is a new testament to the struggle for survival. An itch that offers no relief, a scab picked raw by weary hands. Here, infections are less a complication and more a certainty. Names like plague drifting in whispers among those still standing. The air you struggle to breathe is thick with an unsettling stillness, each inhale more burdened than the last by the needs of the many packed into this miserable flotilla. Starved of fresh breezes, the communal breath hung heavy, shared begrudgingly among the oarsmen in need of every ounce of energy to keep pace. The slightest hint of fresh air seems a myth, snatched by those occasionally called topside, leaving behind only the dense bouquet of despair. The galley itself becomes a chamber of echoes, its inhabited depths resounding with the symphony of suffering. The groan of timbers joins a choir of human voice, grunts of exertion, coughs of malady, and anguished cries of those fallen victim to the ceaseless grind. This opera of endurance finds its time at the relentless pounding of the taskmaster's drum, a grim metronome that forces all to find their place in its unending refrain. In these haunted halls, scars showcase the passage of hands seeking comfort, control or consolation. Scratched initials, charred symbols, the remnants of souls who lived and laboured unseen, known only by the traces they left behind. The gallery aboard the galley becomes an anthology of agony, a place where each stain tells a story, each rattle of chain sings a lament, and the wear of the bench slavery whispers truths that echo across the ages. Underneath, the persistent trepidation of structural collapse weaves into the fabric of daily fear. Each creak and groan becomes prophecy of impending ruin, a storm or wave away from catastrophe binding man and galley in a watery grave. A fragile peace with the sea is their constant companion, always teetering near disaster with each lap of tide against the vessel's side. Yet among these unyielding realities, a poignant resignation prevails. Status dissolves into the tide of necessity, leaving only the truth of human endurance below decks. Individuals fade into their labour, faceless among the collective that drags itself ever onward. This is the unending cycle, a destiny woven by circumstance, remembered in the empty echoes of a galley slipping silently toward the horizon. In the dank and oppressive confines of a Roman war galley, the act of eating was a ritual of necessity, not pleasure, a stark reminder of the grim reality of life beneath the oars. Meals were scarce, meagre, and bereft of dignity, serving merely as the means to keep exhausted muscles moving and despair at bay. The crew, largely comprised of slaves and the destitute, subsisted on rations that scarcely deserved to be called food. Barley mush and an occasional morsel of dried fish were their mealtime's grim offerings. This diet, simple in its brutality, fulfilled the basic requirement of survival, yet left no room for satisfaction or joy. Wedged tightly against each other, inhaling the stifling air thick with human odours and rot, the galley's inhabitants endured their mealtimes. Eating in such proximity stripped them of any remaining dignity, the act completed with fingers dirtied by toil and skin stained with sweat and grime. Utensils were a luxury that mocked their plight. Bowls precariously balanced on their thighs were the only vessels permitted in this floating purgatory. The barley mush was dense and coarse, as unyielding as the lives to which these men were condemned. Cold and congealed, it clung to their throats with each reluctant gulp. The dried fish, preserved with the saltiness of the sea they served, offered little solace, tough and sinewy, as far removed from culinary pleasure as possible. For those chained to the oars, this monotonous diet was simply fuel, barely enough to sustain life, offering a lingering hunger that gnawed constantly at their resolve. Amidst the relentless rhythm of rowing, food was consumed as quickly as the overseer's oppressive gaze allowed, a compelling necessity, not a moment of respite. Battles could not be fought on empty stomachs, but nourishment came grudgingly, never adequately fulfilling what their labours demanded. The sense of camaraderie that food often forges was here supplanted by suspicion and an overwhelming fear of theft. Men protectively clutched their bowls, eyes ever vigilant, wary of the desperate few, willing to risk everything for an extra mouthful. Trust was a costly currency in this oppressive underworld, where every portion was fought for with desperation, born of starvation. Hardtack, a hard, dry staple occasionally included in their rations, was more often than not infested with worms. A symbol of their neglect, it required soaking to soften its harshness for consumption. Water mingled with the bitterness of their conditions as they fought to stomach the indifference baked into every piece. Food became a tool of control, its scarcity driving spirits lower, trapping them in a vicious cycle of fatigue and frustration. Hunger sapped morale and carved away at self-respect, leaving men mentally and physically broken. Eating purely to stave off death, their identities were eroded with each bite, further chaining them to a fate seemingly beyond escape. Energy reserves drained. Rebellion seemed impossible. Merely surviving another day was the highest aspiration. On board this forlorn vessel, the absence of utensils echoed a greater lack of personal agency, a visible disregard for their humanity. Fingers, cracked and labour-worn, lent a primal air to their survival, offering a tactile reminder of their plight. Deprived of ceremony, their eating was animalistic, contrasting starkly with the dinners enjoyed on land by free citizens, where food was celebration and camaraderie. On the galley, every scrap consumed was a reminder of a life tethered to oars, dedicated to nothing more than survival. The capricious sea further compounded their misery. With the rising and falling swells came seasickness, turning already hard-won sustenance into torment. Meals were repeated, regurgitated between bouts of rowing, as nausea took its toll. Each wave mocked their attempts to eat, threatening to undo the very act that kept them alive. Yet through these tribulations they persisted, forcing down hardtack and mush with the determination that only desperation could inspire. Resourcefulness became a lifeline. Without adequate provisions or proper tools, ingenuity and camaraderie were the means to reclaim a semblance of control. Yet these makeshift alliances were tenuous, easily strained by the desperation of hunger and fear of the overseer's whip. In this microcosm, food theft was both an act of rebellion and survival. Each stolen grain a whisper of defiance against unyielding oppression. Eating under such conditions exacted a psychological toll greater than mere physical hunger. Malnourishment dulled the mind, tethering it to the crude cycle of rowing and survival. It was a strategy employed to ensure obedience, a weakened body too broken to conceive rebellion. Hope became ephemeral, crumbling as easily as hardtack, subduing any thoughts of escape with its relentless grip. For free Romans, food was a cultural touchstone, a symbol of leisure and kinship. Yet aboard the Galley, it was twisted into a tool of domination, denying any connection to the rich social fabric from which these men were torn. The essence of dining shared in the open air, full of laughter and warmth, was reduced to the bleak act of consumption, the dismal drizzle of bare sustenance down parched throats. Thus, the very necessity of food, instead of uplifting them, served as a harsh reminder of their bondage and the life that lay just beyond their grasp, a distant memory longing to be realised. In the dim, oppressive heat of a Roman galley's hold, the unceasing rhythm of a drum echoed through timbers that groaned like the souls they encased. Each beat was command and curse, directing the tempo of life for those chained to their oars. The drum was not merely sound, it was life's relentless metronome, synchronizing flesh and despair into a single, obedient force. Beneath this dull thud, men huddled in the eerie companionship of shared torment. Falling out of rhythm was not an option, it was an invitation for the lash. And that lash, wielded with pitiless precision, was a reminder of one's place in the cruel hierarchy of the sea. The taskmaster, seated just above, wielded his authority like a death sentence in waiting, his beating sticks as decisive as a general's command. He was not a comrade, only an arbiter of survival, keeping the ship in line with the captain's ambitions. The dread of his whip bound oarsmen together in a unity forged by suffering. Silence and fear coursed through the wooden gulag, whispers swallowed by the hum of inevitability. When the whip spoke, it was a language of agony understood by all. It carved its lessons with precision, demarcating the borders of obedience in open flesh. To bear the lash was to wear failure like a brand, visible to all within the narrow confines of despair. Amongst the chain-bound fraternity, marked backs spoke volumes, tales of missed beats and endurance pushed to its limits. The whip did more than break skin. It promised ruin for repeated faults, as wounds festered in the salt-laden air. Here a man was measured not by his spirit, but by the calluses that hardened his palms. Acceptance grew from mutual cruelty, a shared acknowledgement that submission was a brotherhood none desired, but all shared in dark complicity. Day in and day out, the oarsman's world was measured in blisters and silent screams. Hands, worn past recognition, developed their own topography of labour. Each stroke in the churning water was a violent reminder, the wooden handle an adversary biting into fingers, wrists and palms. The skin wore thin, turned scaly. A new armour craved from toil, camaraderie discovered in grimaces shared over the biting branding of wood. Yet beyond the raw physicality, the soul bore its own burden, chafing against memories of freedom from which there was scant escape. In this prison, silence was a paradoxical omnipresence, a prisoner locked with them. Though the sea hammered the hull with deafening insistence, inside, the weight of silence soared in its potency, shared amongst grimaces and shrugs. The labour-rendered cries futile, better kept within, rather than to draw the master's ire. Here, men bound by chains also bound themselves to each other, forming connections through unspoken agony. When the whip cut air, it cut solidarity, yet within broken silence lay seedlings of strength. Unity above all reigned supreme, a necessity more than a choice. Men may have been reluctant participants, but they were united in a common fate. Proximity bred strange comradeships, brothers in chains enduring side by side. The hull's gloom offered no refuge, just snatches of relief found in whispered oaths of vigilance. The rowers knew that survival was a team effort, reinforced by the pulse of collective exertion. This tangled fraternity stumbled into shared purpose, not by volition, but by the harsh decree of necessity. Aboard the galley, monotony was tyrant and teacher. Each oarsman constructed a mental fortress, refuge against the relentlessness of routine. Memories became currency in this barter for sanity, reimagining freedoms lost. The present's harsh verity served as a counterpoint to dreamt vistas where chains dissolved into nothingness. They turned to gods unknown in supplication, crafting myths of hope in their wooden tombs. Beneath the drumbeat they spun fantasies, interior dialogues that offered momentary reprieve from the unyielding darkness. But even in proximity, isolation was a spectral presence. Despite the mass of bodies, each man felt alone, detached from former lives yet ever yearning. Isolation was not merely physical but emotional, stripped down to numbers and sinew by the relentless beat. The galley stripped individuality, anonymity writ large as ships heaved against the tide. Such solitude gnawed at resolve, forcing men back into themselves when companionship was not enough. They rowed not just against the sea, but against the immensity of their own thoughts. The overseer balanced on his own tumultuous fulcrum, part guardian, part executioner. His authority stemmed from fear's mastery, a calculus of human emotion poised with the whip. Understanding that cruelty alone could fracture discipline was key. Instead, manipulation of dread into willing subjugation. The taskmaster straddled empathy and ruthlessness, observing strength and fracture among his charges. His command was the guiding force, marrying brutality with shrewd motivation. Time on the galley stretched and contracted, both a merciless jailer and companion. Days and nights blended into unending rhythm, an oceanic dance marked by strokes turned seconds. The passage of time promised no solace but the knowledge of mortality hovering in distant ports. They stroked oars as pendulum swings, dictating and defeating epochs at once. At last the drumbeat fades for some, marking the journey's end. A cessation amid dwindled hope. The muted echo promises reprieve, a chance at release from timber-bound servitude. The cessation of the drum's dirge signified a shifting destiny, the promise of solid ground beckoning beyond ceaseless tides. Some oarsmen would find peace ashore, others freedom within the drum's famed silence, trading tedium for boundless liberty at sea's edge. In the dim, cloying belly of a Roman war galley, life begins anew when you grip the oar for the first time. Your hands are soft, untouched by labour, but the unyielding wood shows no mercy. Within hours, blisters rise and burst, leaving raw flesh exposed to the salt water that seeps relentlessly through the hull's cracks. Each stroke becomes an agonizing trial, salt crystals embedding themselves in open sores, a harsh initiation into the world of the oarsman. Yet survival demands adaptation. The unending rhythm of rowing's not just a routine, it's a lifeline. You must endure the relentless discomfort, for time grants no quarter in hardening your hands before the initial suffering etches its mark on flesh. Every oarsman here shares this silent torment, a fellowship forged not in words but in mutual endurance. Camaraderie grows where pain and necessity meet. The understanding is unspoken yet profound. Once the skin breaks, infection lurks close behind, a silent predator. The Romans, with their rudimentary grasp of hygiene, offer no solace in these cramped confines. Cuts blister and fester, turning angry and red as pus weeps from untreated wounds. The stench of decay mingles with the constant scent of sweat and salt, creating an unbearable atmosphere. Here, neglect can cost life itself. Fevers rage unchallenged, and an oarsman might finally fall victim, consumed by an unseen foe more relentless than the sea itself. Beyond infection, malnutrition stains the days of every rower. Meals sparse in sustenance leave the body craving what it cannot have. Scurvy eats away at strength, each bite into hardened rations a test of teeth already compromised by a lack of essentials. This ailment epitomizes despair, striking silently but visibly as gums bleed and teeth loosen, dropping into the indifferent ocean below. Those left to chew with empty gums must find ways to consume the meagre offerings, strengthening their resolve as much through will as through nourishment. The brine's assault extends beyond skin and mouth, persistently invading the eyes. Salt water from tempestuous waves splashes indiscriminately, stinging with precise cruelty. Vision blurs, eyes raw and reddened in the semi-darkness. Infection looms over sight as rest fails to mend what constant exposure degrades. An oarsman must squint against these challenges, every beat of the drum demanding unerring precision amidst a haze of saline mist. Within this oppressive environment, the elements emerge as both tormentor and teacher. The sun beats mercilessly on exposed skin, drying it into a semblance of leather that offers little protection. Meanwhile, the cruel kiss of the sea preserves what it simultaneously destroys. Each season brings its own agony. Summer's heat parches and punishes, while winter's chill seeps into bones. Resistance becomes a matter of mental endurance as much as physical, an acceptance of the sea's indifferent duality. Under such strains, the mind is as vulnerable as the body, teetering at the edge of sanity. Hours blend into a relentless march of rowing, pain and monotony fusing into a blurred existence. Some find solace in the rhythm, a lullaby for sanity against the never-ending pressure. Others watch their minds unravel, succumbing to the void between each beat of oar against sea. In rare moments, laughter echoes weakly, a fragile lifeline tethered to the last threads of humanity. Life aboard the Galley is underscored by reminders of mortality. Death visits often, swift and unsentimental, alleviating suffering and making space. A body is unchained and cast overboard, the sea inheriting another soul. For those left behind, each disappearance hammers home the transient nature of survival. Yet this cycle breeds a peculiar resilience, a determination to live that flourishes defiantly amidst adversity. The scars carried by these men are not merely physical. Embedded within them are stories of endurance, of fleeting hope that refuses to be extinguished. The collective suffering carves a legacy into the fierce hearts of those who endure. A silent, shared strength that binds them long after the oars rest. Each scar whispers stories of survival against all odds, a testament to the indomitable spirit that defines their existence. To outsiders, the life of a galley slave may seem bereft of dignity, yet beneath the chains lies a profound humanity and a fierce pride in mere survival. Each stroke of the oar, each scar earned, tells a tale of indomitable endurance. Amidst humiliation, a quiet defiance grows, and pride kindles fires that stave off despair. It's this spirit that etches each rower's story into history's broader tapestry, marked by suffering, but ultimately driven by the relentless will to endure. The echoes of these lives linger long after the slaves themselves have vanished into history's depths. Their journey, marked by suffering yet undefeated by it, remains a powerful testament to human tenacity. Surviving voices, whether in whispers or shared memories, remind us of a time when endurance itself was a profound victory. Against the vast, uncaring ocean, these souls carved their legacy, enduring beneath waves of adversity, undaunted and indelible. In the deceptive calm before impact, tension thickens the air around the oarsmen, each tightly clutching their oars as they listen to the call reverberating along the deck, a kind of ancient war cry echoing through the wooden hull. These men, a mix of conscripts, slaves and desperate volunteers, are all too familiar with the creaks of the massive timbers above them. Yet, as the order for ramming resounds, an electric jolt of anxiety courses through the line. The relentless drumbeat accelerates, every thud driving them into a frenzy of synchronized movement. Their muscles, strained and obedient, channel every ounce of power into this soul-crushing task. The oarsmen, heartened by the rhythm, form the beating heart of the war galley, a vessel crafted as both a marine weapon and a floating prison, the embodiment of Roman military might. This engineering marvel slices through waves, propelled by the unyielding will of the men below deck. Above, soldiers and sailors brace for the impact against enemy hulls. For those chained below, their battle lacks the dignity of shield and sword. Instead, endurance becomes their weapon against both the elements and their own failing bodies. In this heart-pounding moment, time seems to stretch, offering each man a fleeting reflection on how fate has brought him to this desperate struggle for life. Bound by chains stronger than iron, those of duty and survival, the oarsmen have become one with their massive oars. These simple yet deadly tools offer both salvation and doom as each stroke brings the vessel closer to its destiny. Every muscle and straining tendon must respond with near impossible coordination. Falling even a second behind could spell ruin for all. They move as one, a living organism of flesh and fury, an ancient Roman assembly of man and machine. Weathered figures, encrusted in grime, sweat and salt, toil against the forces of nature and the ambitions of men. Each movement feels predestined, the smack of wood against water, a grim melody played alongside the cries of men. Above, officers march with stern resolve, their commands precise, eyes narrowed against the impending battle. Underneath, nerves unravel quietly in the relentless motion of oars navigating the brackish waters. With myriad voices and the grinding strength of invisible labour, the galley surges forward, driven by fear, hope, and courage. The collision, inevitable as it is, represents a shattering culmination of momentum and human toil. As opposing vessels meet in a violent embrace, the impact sends a shiver through both ships, felt deep in the bones of men now bound by the same sea. This universal moment spares neither wood nor flesh, succumbing to the force of the collision. The explosive jolt strains the boats to breaking point, a soundscape painting of destruction. Amidst clattering weapons and unsecured objects, men above and below lose their footing. For those chained to the galley decks below, oars become awkward burdens, amplifying each twist and jolt. Above the shrieking of splintered timbers, yelps merge into a cacophony of disarray. The galley shudders, momentarily caught in an embrace, a dance of predator and prey where roles can shift in an instant. Even as bodies are hurled between decks, the will to live remains strong, binding man to oar, oar to vessel, vessel to fate. Beyond the chaos, shattered wood becomes a surreal tableau. The design gives way to nature's disdain for craft. Beneath these decks, rowers struggle against wood's betrayal. No longer mere oarsmen, they now fight to maintain their vessel's integrity amidst the madness. As the ship devours seawater, oarsmen duel with the encroaching sea, labouring to regain cohesion. They are a chorus of splinters and screams, battling the reality that their once impenetrable ship faces possible decline. Within the violence, each oar carries its own tale of survival, a weight akin to the gravity of stars. Beneath masks of instinct and desperation, bound men row on, transforming silent cries into determined motion. With each stroke, they face man's ultimate bargain with desperation, ignited by hopes of freedom within their chained existence. The disintegrating hull, like a demiurge, stands against time's march, presenting the oarsman's fate as a vivid mosaic of hope, lulled by the sea. With oars locked against waves, eyes stare upwards, tethered to one another, and their wooden cage, touchable tension a constant reminder of captors' ambitions. It becomes clear that the ram's impact is more than physical destruction. It imprints itself on fate, a tide of resignation washing over each man. Among the oarsmen, veterans of this pulverising dance stand as guides, charting a course through the pain. These keepers of wisdom, openly sharing tales of survival, offer hope amid chaos. Adrenaline ignites moments of camaraderie, uniting them as blue skies watch from above. Locked in their wooden confines, hands become anchors, knitting threads of desperation into a shared mythos. Despite the wrath around them, a sinister thrill lies in battle's symphony. Amongst the terror, an unfathomable beauty emerges within this vibrant chaos, where Roman might clashes with determined foes. Beyond rhyme and reason, the ocean too celebrates this wave of violence, a ballet where oarsmen, embracing their ordeal, craft an unsung ode with every breath. In this brutal theatre, the ancient galley surges on, shaping stories untold, echoes of history dancing in the relentless ebb and flow. In the heart of the Mediterranean, under a sky as ruthless as it was beautiful, Roman galleys prowled the waters like predatory beasts. These were no mere vessels, they were arsenals of war, where human endurance met the terrifying power of flame. Fire, more than muscle or metal, levelled the naval battleground, needing only proximity and opportunity. It was a tyrant among the elements, transforming ships into floating death traps, and it had no discriminating mercy. As oarsmen laboured in the depths of wood and sweat, fire above wielded a grim justice, equalising the struggle between man and nature in a singular, horrifying dance. Aboard these galleys, the deployment of fire was a meticulous affair, both artful and deadly. Pots of boiling pitch or burning coals were cast onto enemy decks, igniting chaos as quickly as they were thrown. The materials that held the ship together, Wood, tar, sailcloth betrayed it in battle, the perfect tinder for a spreading blaze. The timing of these fiery devices was everything, turning hot havoc into advantage if wielded deftly. Sailors plunged the decks into a smoke-filled nightmare, leveraging confusion for tactical gain. Yet for those tasked with handling these incendiaries, each misstep could morph ally into adversary, the ship itself an unwitting accomplice in its fiery undoing. Below decks, chained to benches with little but the rhythm of the rowing drum for solace, the oarsmen experienced fire's terror from afar. The essence of warfare filtered down in haunting echoes, muffled screams, the acrid smell of burning wood, the distant roar of flame. These men were participants in the battle by circumstance alone, their fate inexorably tied to the outcome above. Enclosed in suffocating darkness, they were witnesses to a nightmare written in flames, their lives a grueling choreography dictated by an unseen conductor. Fire was an ever-looming threat, its tendrils of heat creeping into their imaginations, chaining their thoughts as surely as their bodies. The strategy of fire in combat was as calculated as it was devastating. Roman tactics of ramming and boarding were rendered more lethal by flame, designed to dismantle enemy coherence and scatter plans into chaos. Igniting an enemy vessel turned disciplined maneuvers on their heads, exploiting every opening with merciless efficiency. This fiery chaos was a last resort when all other strategies faltered, a desperate gamble that could not be orchestrated without nerve and audacity. The flames were a force of nature, manipulated by skilled sailors who bent wind and wave to their whim, drawing enemy ships unwittingly into fire's destructive embrace. For sailors steeped in superstition, fire was more than a weapon. It was a sign from the gods, a divine reckoning over human folly. Stories of mythical wrath and celestial punishment coloured their perception of fire at sea, a purging sent by the likes of Neptune himself. Such beliefs intermingled with the harsh realities of a sailor's life, reinforcing fear with tales that turned flames into omens. As they set sail into battle, these men incanted fervently, hoping to appease unseen forces and avoid a fate sealed by elemental fury. Yet even amidst the inferno, stories emerged of extraordinary bravery. Sailors faced down the infernal blaze with courage unmatched, fighting on burning decks as their comrades fell around them. Armoured with nothing but determination, they battled against the oppressive heat and caustic smoke, sometimes saving their ships through sheer force of will. In these moments, distinctions of rank vanished. Noble and slave alike were driven by grit alone, their resolve defining their place in the aftermath of the fire. The survivors bore witness to a truth scorched into their very essence, that humanity, in its rawest form, is forged in adversity's flame. The aftermath of such battles was a sombre testament to war's grim theatre. Charred vessels bobbed like floating tombs, remnants of human endeavour blanching under a ruthless sun. Survivors carried scars that transcended the physical, their psyches marked eternally by the torment of heat and smoke. Victory, if it came, was a muted affair, a melancholic punctuation against the persistent echoes of burning memories. The ghosts of battles lingered long after flames subsided, their spectral presence a reminder of the fragility of human enterprise against nature's unforgiving forces. Within this atmosphere, rituals and ceremonies burgeoned, a means to navigate and placate the volatile art of fire and fate. Sailors indulged in rites seeking divine favour, blessings to temper the unfathomable ferocity of maritime flame. Decks were anointed, ancient words murmured into the wind, offering surrender to the flames. a solemn dance between divine whim and human hopefulness. The embrace of fire, both feared and exalted, shaped Rome's naval narrative, its legacy settling deep into the marrow of history's consciousness. As these echoes ripple through time, they carry the undeniable imprint of Rome's fiery struggles, reinforcing the eternal interplay of hope and disaster under vast, indifferent skies. On the surface of the Roman Empire's vast maritime landscape, a unique tapestry of human existence unfolded deep within the galleys. Contrary to popular belief, not every soul tasked with rowing was bound by chains. The crews of these inexorable vessels were composed of a complex web of humanity, bound together not by uniformity, but by necessity. Here, amid the clamour and chaos, one could find free men, citizens who, driven by dire economic straits and shrinking options, opted for a grim commitment to the oar. In a world devoid of safety nets, the desperate rhythm of the galley represented a stark form of survival for Roman men standing on the precipice of starvation. Yet whatever faint agency these volunteers believed they possessed dissolved upon boarding the ship, ground to dust beneath the relentless toil and omnipresent threat of death. The rigid class divisions of Roman society faded here, and free men soon blended into the indistinct mass of labouring humanity. It was the place where chains of iron and circumstance intertwined, illustrating how the sea, a force indifferent to the origins of its rowers, demanded the same unyielding labour from everyone aboard. The pathway to life aboard these floating fortresses began ashore, with recruitment driven by a potent mix of persuasion and pitiless necessity. Roman officials scoured market squares, extending promises of regular meals and modest wages to lure men away from empty bellies and idle days. Some men, through naive hope, even imagined that such a life might hold a rare glimmer of adventure and prestige, but these illusions were quickly extinguished in the suffocating air below deck. Dreams of Odyssean wanderings crumbled into the harsh reality of grueling labour, driven by the sharp crack of the overseer's whip. Amid the darkness and back-breaking rhythm, these men confronted choices no one wanted to make. A poor farmer, his crops decimated by drought, might see the galley as a reprieve from unending hunger, a tragic duty over an inevitable demise. Desperation carried them onto these ships, yet despite the bleakness, some clung to hopes of a new beginning upon return. The promise of saving enough to start afresh, far from poverty's grasp, was a fragile light flickering against the tempest of circumstances. Yet for many, this light dimmed long before the journey reached its end, their fates sealed by the relentless hand of the sea. In theory, volunteering might suggest a touch of autonomy, an ability to negotiate one's labour against the unruly seas. However, in practice, such freedoms were illusions as fleeting as mist. Contracts signed with trembling hope were rendered meaningless by the water's edge, as both volunteer and prisoner found themselves chained to an identical fate. The galley levelled all under its relentless demands, and the resolves of men blurred into an indistinguishable muscle applied to survival. Yet the land remembered. While the convicts bore the literal chains of their past, volunteers carried the intangible shackles of social stigma. Rowing, devoid of honour, marked one as desperate, failing, or cowardly, a mark not easily washed away. Upon returning home, former oarsmen faced a society reticent to forget, where whispers left their choice marked as a scar upon their identity. What they abandoned at sea followed them, chains replaced by rumour and disdain, defining them by the choices made in the shadow of survival. Life on a Roman galley was a hierarchy of suffering, with no resemblance to the epic defiance of Spartacus. Unlike the famed rebel who resisted his chains, these men bore their scars without the solace of legendary grandeur. Aboard, disparate groups of slaves, convicts, and volunteers clashed within this murky hierarchy, all striving against the tide of deterministic fate and the faded dream of liberation. Here no victor emerged, only the perpetual drive of oars, haunted by the whispers of freedom and the weight of routine hardship that defined their days. In the crowded belly of the galley, these diverse lives clashed, fostering unexpected alliances. Free men, marginalised by poverty or misfortune, found themselves tangled with slaves and hardened convicts. Despite their different paths, they discovered an unspoken camaraderie forged in the fires of shared suffering. Amidst their synchronised toil, they navigated this peculiar fellowship as bonds of unity emerged in their shared plight, a harmony tinged with discord, tempered by the whip's indiscriminate strike. Promises of pay lured many to the galley, a bright shimmer amid darker prospects. Yet, in practice, compensation was elusive and uncertain, dictated by survival and the whims of the commanding officers. Tales of broken promises spread swiftly, and the clink of anticipated coin evaporated into silence. Still, the dream of recompense kept hope alive, the mere thought of payment providing a meagre anchor to endure the ceaseless storms of labour. The ferocity of galley discipline spared none, the lash striking with uninhibited equality. No man, whether volunteer or prisoner, escaped its reach. In its wake, shared suffering forged an unbreakable camaraderie. The whip's snapping cadence transcended the boundaries of choice, transforming individual burdens into a collective yoke pulled against an indifferent cosmos. In the end, the sea emerged as the great equalizer, reducing all distinctions to nothing more than ripples lost beneath its vast expanse. It taught every man one undeniable truth. Bound by the oar, they shared the universal reality of helplessness and mortal frailty. The stories and lives of freemen, convicts and slaves alike blended into its eternal rhythm, offering no solace save for the awareness that, in the silent dance of oar against water, all were equal against the inevitabilities of nature's depths. The moment the winds began to howl and the rain lashed the sea, an ominous silence spread among the galley slaves. With every breath you could sense the storm's approach as the air thickened with the scent of salt and ozone, sinking deep into your bones. Below deck, alongside your fellow rowers, you braced for nature's onslaught. The sky overhead transformed from grey into a swirling, monstrous tableau of black clouds, while the sea's familiar menace became an alien nightmare. Time dragged as you steeled yourself not for the waves, but for the shrill, urgent commands that surely lay ahead. Locked eyes with your companions mirrored your own fear, a reminder that class held no sway beneath the storm's wrath. The sea offered neither nobility nor slave a saviour in gold or influence. Romans saw tempestuous weather as divine displeasure, imagining Jupiter's lightnings cast in anger. In the ship's hold, no such entity could be outrun nor pleased. You were resigned to endure whatever came, slave and freeman alike bound in shared vulnerability. But amid the thunderous roar, an eerie acceptance seeped in, acknowledging the tempest's grandeur and the insignificance of your struggles beneath it. Down inside the darkened hull, you sat in near total blackness, aware of the now cold, damp wood beneath you. The galley jerked violently, threatening to jettison its living cargo. Deprived of sight, you relied on touch and sound, yet the storm's fury muffled all else. The ship's chaotic motions distorted the familiar rhythm of rowing into a brutish, unpredictable torment, throwing you against the man beside you. Survival's primal instinct meant camaraderie, once born from shared suffering, morphed into a battle each fought internally. Old teachings of placating storm deities filled your mind. Tales of drowned sailors on ghostly waves seemed unsettlingly plausible. The tempest's rolling turned nausea into a constant companion, clutching your guts in unyielding torment. Without the rhythmic rowing to anchor you, sickness gripped tighter with each passing moment. Trapped below deck, there was no reprieve. The ship's oppressive interior, a relentless spin cycle of heaving stomachs and swallowed bile. In this world of vomit and stench, dignity had long since faded, swept away by necessity. Across the rowing benches, the sickness spread like a wave, leaving each man weakened, clinging desperately for respite as the storm raged outside. In the chaos, a chorus of murmured prayers rose, initially swallowed by the storm but growing into a resonant collective plea. Romans of diverse tongues called earnestly to Jupiter and Neptune, each invoking these gods for deliverance. Desperate promises of future piety and offerings flowed freely with hopes of escape. Despite isolated intentions, a shared desperation bound men together, reverberating through the galley like the ship's own timbers. Whether grasping carved amulets or silently lending their voice to the prayerful refrain, each man sought connection, a thread to hold fast as the storm twisted the world achingly out of balance. Abruptly, the storm's fury abated, leaving behind an impossible calm. One moment, the ship thrashed like a beast fighting its bonds, and the next, a fragile stability spread, as if in benediction. The storm had moved on, leaving you reeling in its absence, the silence as unsettling as the chaos. Though wary of nature's caprice, a collective relief permeated the damp, exhaustion-laden hull. Tentative whispers and hoarse jests echoed softly, raw reminders of the shared ordeal. Knees trembling from exertion, you welcomed the gentle rocking that dared promise peace, heartened by survival against all odds. Yet survival was not victory. Above deck, the crew took account, finding tattered sails and fractured masts, while below, delicate leaks and debris attested to the storm's rage. A resilient spirit emerged from within, pressing forward to restore what could be salvaged. Tethered to practical demands, hands worked as if mending would insulate them against this trial's echoes. Moment by moment, a semblance of order returned to the onus of seafaring life. Amidst chaos was a routine forged in fire, signs of life emerging stubborn against the recent darkness. Lessons emerged, hard-learned amid the chaos. They anchored each soul in truths raw and unguarded, reminding you of man's fragility beneath heaven's whim. Bonds once forged under duress made the tempest, a crucible where societal distinctions crumbled, replaced by an enduring sense of solidarity. Wisdom gleaned added a human texture, polished now with the haunting persistence of storytelling fit for hearthside retellings. Intangible ties strengthened, binding individual experience to a collective narrative that spoke of survival and modest hope. At the heart of the ordeal was the timeless knowledge of life's precariousness. In the dim light, still scarred by salt's torments, was the unyielding awareness of life threaded tenuously among capricious forces. Yet alongside this awareness was a renewed ferocity for living, settled comfortably beside the whispering echoes of distant kin, offering promises only half remembered. And as the ship bobbed gently once more, the day's light sparkled softly on dampened wood, threading together stories of pain, triumph, and the relentless pursuit of the next horizon. Death hung over an ancient Roman war galley, like the omnipresent salt in the sea air, relentless and indifferent to the lives it haunted. For every rower, whether bound by chains or cursed fate, the end was a constant shadow, lurking both swiftly and silently. Illness prowled the miasmatic air, a thief eager to claim victims by night or at the oars. The wheel of fate spun on hours of relentless toil, malnutrition, and untreated wounds that festered in the damp bowels of the ship. Dreadful anticipation gnawed at souls, with each horizon offering nothing but the promise of more Sisyphean drudgery, pushing rowers toward ends tragic rather than triumphant. In the galley's tight, suffocating confines, life and death melded into a collective ordeal. One shared breath followed another, among men facing an ever-nearing curtain call. Countless companions succumbed anonymously, their faces etched with primal fear or resignation. The taskmaster might spare a brief prayer before casting bodies into the depths, quickly replacing them and dismissing grief alongside the departed. Death became a silent crew member, claiming its due as surely as the ship's prow cleaved through aqueous plains. Yet even on this dreary stage, madness was a spectre equally pervasive. The unceasing strain of rowing under enemy fire or during storms broke even the strongest spirits. Chained to benches with scant sight of the horizon, despair and confusion seeped into minds already eroded by isolation and darkness. Delirium found fertile ground, twisting shadows into nightmares that blurred reality's line. The persistent symphony of creaking timbers and crashing waves was an endless lullaby for unrest. This insidious descent into madness carried its stigma, labelled as vulnerability and disruptiveness to the galley's unyielding order. Home, spoken aloud, invited dreams that morphed into obsessions and from obsessions into mania. Liberation through madness offered some solace. For others, it was a relentless slide into personal purgatory, as the very sea became both adversary and a silent partner in deteriorating sanity. For those overtaken by death or madness, the passage was swift, cruel, and often without ceremony. Born from duty and hygiene, more than reverence, corpses were discarded into the ocean with scant sentience. In more primitive cultures, death occurred with fanfare. Here civilization collapsed into necessity, offering bodies to the ocean, signing no monumental tributes save the sea's unforgiving embrace. The memories of the departed became one with the tides, their stories sinking into obscurity as sun-bleached chains lay unclaimed beside empty benches. Surviving this maritime crucible was bittersweet. Some rowers were shifted, endlessly shuffled among galleys like stories swapped over a crackling campfire. Others, considered spent, found their freedom in slave markets. Their experiences scarred first their flesh, and then the history unrecorded by scholars more fixated on generals and emperors than these anonymous souls. Still, the survivors' tales, woven from triumph and despair, serve to intrigue society's fringes, if whispered on edge. Stories of resilience and gritty endurance floated on, offering a narrative bridge to worlds unseen by more fortunate eyes. Among the echoes of rowers long past, the sea remained a silent guardian of unspoken histories. With every crash and crest, it whispered details of their trials to those eager to listen. Their presence, though unchronicled, enriched the folklore, proving that through common struggle, an eternal kinship binds humanity across epochs. The sea murmured their existence in tireless arcs, teaching us that perhaps all mariners are bonded, not just by the water they traverse, but by the spirit with which they face an unpredictable future. Rare rays broke through this sombre tale, when rowers, in extraordinary instances, were elevated from their maritime graves to earn or fight for freedom. These opportunities were precious and often as illusory as the horizon itself, yet they kindled hope. Salvaged men walked new paths, exchanged chains for swords, and saw worlds anew, though always carrying the indelible imprints left by a galley's constraints. Such moments became cherished folklore, casting tiny symbols of optimism amid a sea of grim endurance. Yet even the indomitable spirit faced trials among the camaraderie fostered benches. Bonds crafted through shared struggle, often unravelled, driven by desperation into open conflict. Mutinies flared sporadically, acts both audacious and dangerous in their scope. Though most were swiftly quashed, they underscored desperate instincts, an innate human hunger for autonomy, pressing at the very chains that bound them. Those rare mutinies that saw fruition sketch tales of bravery, quick but brilliant, and cast light on fleeting glimpses of freedom. Ghost-like, once the galley wood decayed beneath the waves or upon distant shores, whispers surfaced, hauntings of past tales echoing sailor songs, and groans of long-gone voyages. Time spooled memories into collective folklore, inviting generations to sail the ancient waters, metaphorically drawing new chronicles from old travails. These tales of humanity's determination reshaped labour's narrative, aligning contemporary lenses upon ancient toil. Thus, under moonlit skies, the eternal sea rocks those restless spirits, immortalising struggles undisturbed by time's grinding passage. Ever present, these tales drive temporal travellers to pause, to reflect, to continue their journey across waters deeply intertwined with the legacy of those who navigated them before. If you found this journey captivating, consider liking and subscribing to our channel for more tales that bring history alive with the grit, beauty, and depth it deserves.